Hello, I'm Wendy. Today it's a watercolour tutorial. It's a loose painting of a snowy landscape. I do love painting snow scenes and paintings with snow in them, but I think this will be the last one for a while now. We've got spring around the corner and I'm looking forward to painting some greens and some flowers. This is my drawing. It's quite a loose sketch with the larger trees in the foreground and the suggestion of the trees in the background. I didn't do a very complicated drawing here, or a very detailed drawing, because a lot of the trees will be painted with the rigger, and I've not drawn them in, I've not penciled them in. You can download this image if you would like. There is a link below in the description box. You should be able to see that I've masked out a few areas on the trees. The masking fluid is a light blue, so I think it will stand out on this drawing. I've suggested a few trees in the distance, a little bit of snow on them as well, but most of the snow is on the foreground trees. If you don't like using masking fluid, then do dispense with it. In this tutorial, I think it will be difficult to paint around the trees, but you could always put some white gouache on at the end, or some acrylic, or some of the white ink that I'm using. I put masking fluid on a few little stones in the river, and also put on a few little specks to stand for snowflakes. I thoroughly wet the sky area of the painting, and then the stage I'm at now is just dropping in some colour to stand for the sky. The colours I'm using here: ultramarine, very dilute, burnt sienna, and a little touch of light red, which can warm up those greys. The ultramarine has been knocked back a little bit with the burnt sienna, as you can probably see. I'm going to show the whole process of this painting to you. I'm not going to skip out any bits, and I probably won't do any fast forwarding either. If you do find it getting a little bit monotonous, clearly you can fast forward for yourself, but I think people do like to see the whole process. I will play a little bit of music for you, and I will chip in with my comments where appropriate. The next stage I did was painting in the shadow areas on the snow, and I generally will do this before painting in the trees. So I'm using this ultramarine knocked back again with a little bit of the burnt sienna. If you wanted to go a bit more purpley, you could use more of the light red. You can see I'm getting a hard edge on the top of the banks, and then what I'm doing is softening the shadow as it goes further up. This particular area here, I did leave one or two hard edges. I would have preferred them to be a bit softer, but there's always changes you can make in a picture. I'm not going to worry about it. So you've got this harder edge, and then going up into the snow, into softer areas where I'm trying to soften it with a damp brush. You'll see this worked a little bit better in some of the other areas nearer the front. See, I make constant adjustments here to try and get the tone right, and the colour of the blue as well. I didn't want it too blue, but it's just getting that that colour and that tone that you think is working in your picture. And you can do a little bit of putting the paint in and pulling it out and softening edges till you feel you've got it just about right. As long as you keep everything wet, you can do this sort of, I don't call it fiddling, I call it modelling in watercolour. You can do this sort of modelling. As long as you keep the paint wet and you're not putting too many layers of colour on top of each other, then you can experiment a little bit until you get something that you think is working better. There wasn't a particular bank on this side, sort of separating the area, so I just put a few soft brush marks on there to suggest some either tree shadows or cloud shadows on the snow. Some sort of random general shadowy marks on the foreground was what was needed here. It's a very loose painting this, so I'm just sort of making the marks and softening some of the edges to suggest the form and the shadows, and then hopefully they will work with everything else that goes on top. I like the colours here, and I think we're getting some sort of feeling of recession with the banks overlapping. If you have a go at this, then don't worry too much about the colours, just try and keep those shadows on the blue side probably, rather than red. You could bring a little bit more red in the foreground. It's rigger work now, and I'm painting the distant trees with the mixture of your burnt sienna and the ultramarine. Because they're in the distance, you'll see more of them, so you can put them sort of branching, seeing some of the top branches. If you use some masking fluid there, just do some darker lines at the side of the lines of the masking fluid that you put on. There we go, nearly done. I'm trying to adjust the tones of those distant trees, as you can see, and not having them too uniform, have some overlapping, have some odd strokes here and there. Not everything has got to be particularly joined up, not everything has got to be spelled out. So painting the foreground trees now, again, constantly adjusting, changing the tones and colours a little bit as you go along, keeping them all wet, so I'm working the trunks and the branches wet into wet. As the trees are coming forward, they're getting a bit larger clearly and also a bit warmer, so I'm using more of the burnt sienna in the mixers here. Also, you're not seeing as much of the tops of the trees here, and this will aid in the feeling of recession in your picture. So painting the main tree now, which I think is the focal point of the painting. Again, dropping in the colours wet into wet. So I'm going to be putting in some of the burnt sienna with a bit of the ultramarine, and then dropping in some darker colours. There isn't a particular light direction in this painting, so let's call it diffuse light in this case. We'll put in some of the darker tones into that first layer to just give an indication of form and to ring the changes, putting in the lights and darks there. And I think it comes together quite nicely. So taking the masking fluid off now, using a rubber, and you can see more clearly now where I actually placed it. And now I'm going to be working on the twigs and the branches and maybe some little saplings that might be growing. I'm using a mix of medium tone washes here and some darker ones just to get some variation in the marks. I think you'll find that this is the stage when your painting really starts coming together. So this is about the stage when I like to put a mount around the painting just to see how it's coming along. You can judge it much better, I think, with the mount around it. I felt it was lacking in trees in what might be called the middle distance there, although I will be putting some foreground grasses on to sort of throw the area back. I'm looking at it now, I could have maybe put more than one on there, so when you're painting this you might like to put one or two more trees in that area. I would do the stream and the reflections at this stage, and I'm just penciling in. I find this is quite useful, just penciling in where some of the reflections might be. Before working on the stream, I got the washes ready, and that was a wash of a knocked back ultramarine and a little bit of light red. I put a wash of clear water over where the stream was. Make this quite wet. Put quite a bit of water on there because we're going to be working this wet into wet, and you want to put the paint at the top and to let it run down. So I'm going to put the colours on the stream to match the colours that are in the sky. So I'm starting off with the light red. It's got a touch of the ultramarine to it, but that's the colour that I can see in the sky. So that's going to form the basis of the stream colour. And then I take the ultramarine mix, and as I said, I drop it at the top and then let it run down. So you probably find you're going to have to lift your board or your painting pad to allow for that to happen. I am being careful, as you can see, painting around the banks. That's a scary bit, isn't it? Adding that dark paint there. But it will dry back. Just let it do its own thing and run down the paper. I didn't want to be too fussy or render things in too much detail on this painting, and I think the masking fluid I put on is working pretty well, but there were a few places where I felt it did need some extra white on there. So you can use your gouache. I am using pen white. You can also use some acrylic, anything that's opaque, just to add those little bits of finishing touches and to put a bit of extra snow on some of the twigs. When the stream was totally dry, I painted wet onto dry with a very light amount of pressure and not very much paint. I just painted a few suggestions of the reflections on just on some of the trees. Just make sure that they do actually reflect properly, and I think using a pencil marks, as I said, to judge where they go can be quite useful. The tree at the front clearly had a larger reflection, and I just did the brush stroke sideways to suggest possibly ripples in the water. Emphasising a few darker shadows just underneath the banks can look quite effective. Next, a few random light brown marks which would suggest the earth which is showing through the snow. Again, not to overdo it and get too fussy. With quite a stiff mixture of brown, with quite a bit of burnt sienna in there, I used the brush on its side, as you can see, and I used a dry brush technique to suggest some of the leaves and little bits of dried, perhaps the remains of autumn foliage, on some of the twigs in front of the stream. I used a rigger to paint the twigs at the front of the stream here, and I used a mix of the ultramarine with the burnt sienna, taking care to keep it on the brown side and not the blue side. If you use too much blue in the mix, you get a black, and the black doesn't look very natural, so keep the twigs nice and warm. Again, I felt it was time to have a look at the picture and see what was needed by putting the mount around it. Some small adjustments, including putting a little bit of shadow underneath those rocks there that are covered in snow. Again, I think that can look quite effective. I could have left the painting at that, but as you do, I decided that the shadow on the front needed some changes, so I felt it needed to be a little bit darker. So having darkened it, then I had to darken the areas in the foreground and add a little bit more snow to the bushes, and I'm not sure really whether I needed to do that or not, but I think it works out all right. I placed a few more little snow-covered pebbles on the stream as well. Also a few more snowflakes in the sky. Phew, that was a long video, wasn't it? Congratulations if you got through to the end. I hope you learned things, I certainly did. And I do hope you enjoy painting your own snow scene. You can give me a thumbs up, and you can also subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss anything that's coming up in the future. Bye for now, and very happy painting.